All right, Shabab, salam alaikum. We're back with another In Context. 2 weeks ago, we talked about all the interested parties in Syria post the revolution and what are their thoughts and what are their. We didn't make future predictions, but we kind of danced around how do they reacted to what's going on in Syria. But that's 2 weeks ago, and a lot is happening on the ground. I figured we should pick up from there and see are there any recent developments that we want to discuss regarding what's going on in Syria now.
Okay, thank you. So what I'd like us to discuss today is the moves of the PKK outfit in northeast Syria to try to perpetuate its statelet. So in the last 2 days, they made two interesting statements. The first one was the co-chair of their self-administration came out saying that we want to deploy French and American forces in a demilitarized zone between Syria and Turkey. This is going to achieve peace, and we are looking forward to peace, and this should be done. The second piece was an interview with the same individual, the co-chair of the administration, on the Saudi-run Al Arabiya TV, where she confirmed that they are talking to quote-unquote neighboring states, including Israel, and urging them to urge Trump to maintain the U.S. colonial presence in northeast Syria. That happens while also the other co-chair, Farhat Abdi, gives an interview with the Syrian flag next to his flag. So the question here is, what are these guys trying to achieve, and where are they heading with that? In my opinion, these guys are after creating a breakaway state, and they are trying to maneuver to maintain the current statelet under pressure. Turkey doesn't want this statelet to continue. It is strategically in a better position today to prevent that from continuing or to make that happen. And they are trying to, the PKK are trying to their best to prevent that from happening. They are not trying to expand or to assert their control as they have been doing previously, but they are trying to survive. And to do that, they are inviting any kind of colonial power they can think of to come and help them. They have worked before with Russia, with France, with the US. They'd like to keep working with France and the US after Russia withdrew. And as a result, they are actually inviting them to create an occupation zone between so-called buffer zone between Turkey and Syria. There are already forces, French and American forces in Syria, but their mandate is weak because their mandate per the Office of Colonial Affairs, also known as the United Nations, is to eradicate ISIS. And ISIS is no more. So the excuse now is, well, we have to support the PKK who are holding ISIS in prisons, which is really weak and laughable. But now they are trying to create a new issue, that there is a war that's going to happen and it's going to threaten international peace if there is no militarized zone occupied by international foreign forces. While the French seem to be receptive, so their foreign minister was making noises, the current government in the US is transitional and cannot make commitments, although it continues to exist and protect these guys. The incoming government does not seem to have tipped its hand either way. And it would be interesting to try to think about that and see where it heads. Joseph, over to you.
Yeah, I think when you explain that, I think everything you said pretty much makes sense, and I think I understand like things in the same way you do. I feel like the collapse of the Assad regime has been really problematic for the SDF PKK forces. I think that there's a vacuum now, and it's swallowing them up very quickly. And there's, you got the pressure to sort of unify and join with, lay down their arms and become a part of the new Syrian state, which obviously they're not a lot of them, maybe all of them, aren't ready to do. And then that means their survival really then depends upon having foreign power to protect them, keep the bubble open. And in my assessment, the only power that can do that is the United States. I don't think France would be effective at keeping that buffer zone alive. Now, what's the United States going to do after Trump comes into power? That's an open-ended question. Last time he didn't seem to care that much about the Kurds, and I don't think he's going to care that much this time either. I personally think that Trump is going to probably work a deal out with Turkey and maybe even his new Syrian government and slowly pull America out of there. Maybe have some kind of very marginal presence just to say they're there. And I think that, PKK is going to have some real problems on their hands coming forward, whether it's going to be, the first line of battle will obviously be between like PKK soldiers and this Syrian National Force and this Turkish-backed militia. But I feel like if that heats up, eventually the new Syrian government's going to have to get involved too, which could all be the opening of a new civil war potentially. So these are very dangerous times in northern Syria, and I think you're right. They're just sort of scrambling, just trying to keep their heads above water right now, trying to do whatever they can, and they'll take the help from anybody. If Israel wanted to occupy and build a military base, they'd be in Deir ez-Zor. They'd be cool with that. I really believe that. I think that they want their own autonomous statelet, and they will do whatever they can to get it. And Turkey will not let that happen. And I think Turkey is willing to potentially even go to war directly if that becomes a reality, which of course would be like the beginning potentially of World War III. So I don't know. I think that hopefully cooler heads prevail. Somehow the new Syrian government convinces these guys to lay down their arms and come to some kind of peaceful agreement to live in a unified state. But I read this stuff about Israel talking about creating cantons in Syria and dividing the country up into like multiple segments. Like I don't think that's going to happen, at least peacefully. So I think that it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out over the next year. But I think at some point something's going to give, because the status quo as it currently stands cannot survive. I don't think Syria can grow as a state if it still has like literally a third of the country that's like in a status that's unclear. You know what I mean? So I think that this has to be resolved one way or the other. Otherwise, Syria is never going to really stabilize.
I just want to clarify something from a simplistic standpoint. The question is, you implied that, well, didn't the SDF and PKK kind of quote unquote join forces in order to help eradicate the Syrian regime, correct?
No, never.
No.
Never.
So they achieved this without their help?
They were always allies of Assad.
Did they come to Assad's help?
Assad regime handed over weapons and control over areas
Yes,
to PKK.
correct. So when the revolution and the end of it, they never intervened?
They tried to take over some areas, and there was actually clashes with them, and they withdrew after clash.
Okay, now I understand what you're saying. I didn't know that.
Never.
Hmm.
The PKK has always been the PKK to begin with owes its existence to the sponsorship of Assad. To begin with, it's Assad in 1979 who sponsored this nefarious organization.
Yes.
So it's childish. It's very disingenuous to claim that these guys were at any point in any kind of conflict with Assad.
Which shows what the Syrian revolution did was so impressive. They did it without anyone's help.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's why I think that, from my perspective, this is why they have the rightful claim to power and rule. And it sort of frustrates me when I see, Western secular liberal anti-imperialists making demands on this revolutionary government that are, in my opinion, unreasonable. Like they won. They ought to have the say in the direction of the state. And you have people already attacking them because they're not shaking women's hands and silly nonsense that are offending Western sensibilities. And in the end, like when you're the conquering army, you're the victor of the spoils, right? Like, and for me, like that's why I think that they have such a claim to power, because, as you said, they did it on their own. it wasn't like it was a joint effort with them and the SDF and other factions, so we got to share power because we all equally contributed. Like this was like pretty unilateral thing by primarily HTS and a few of the smaller militias that were supportive of them. This had nothing to do with SDF. There's nothing to do with any of these other groups. And
On the other hand, the French foreign minister says that Western colonial powers owe debt to SDF, so we have to support them. And we have to support them by granting them a piece of Syria, which is, it's not just colonial, it's really nasty. We're going to reward criminals because they are nice to us.
But again, though, I think France is becoming increasingly irrelevant. Like, they've basically been tossed out of Africa at this point, and I don't think anyone's letting them back in. And I really feel like France is, the Americans still have power, no denying that. But the French, I think, really are retreating into irrelevance. So they can whine and complain all they want. They got enough problems at home right now. So I don't see them as being a force for colonialism in the future. They may dream of it, but once again, reality and talk are two different things. I think France's soft power now is at an all-time low. Like their attractiveness as a cultural hegemon is really in the decline.
Just a note about the media, Arab and Western media have a habit of blowing up Israel's significance. So the Israelis, yes, dream about dividing Syria into 3, 4, 5 pieces, depending on who is talking. But there is a difference between dreaming and being able to achieve it. Actually, that lady, Ilham Ahmad, the self-administration, was quite careful in her phrasing. They want Israel to help them convince Trump to maintain his colonial presence in Syria, because Israel is already in deep trouble trying to absorb the Palestine. So they can't digest the piece that they have already eaten. So they are not about to expand. They don't have the resources. All what they are trying to do is trying to play a political role by invading southern Syria. Trying to invade more than that overexposes them, and they have done this before because of their crazy aggression, and they paid for it. So that's why they are playing it close. Even when they invaded Lebanon, you would have observed that this invasion was much more limited than the previous one, 2006. So although they are really nasty and aggressive and would like to destroy the whole world around them, their overexpansion has worked against them before, and they are quite careful about that. So the truth is, what the PKK is after is to maintain the American sponsorship that has always been present to support them since the beginning. In my opinion, even the turnover of Öcalan from Syria to Turkey in 1999 was US mediated. And actually, there were leaks in media like that. So the US has always been sponsoring them. It sees in them a tool to contain or control Turkey, and that's why it would want to maintain them and keep them going on. It also sees in them a tool to colonize a good part of Syria, but I'm not sure this is strategically worthwhile, because already Iraq is a US colony. So it is quite feasible that Trump might find that this is an unnecessary expense while he wants to devote his colonial resources to China, and might just drop it off. Now, yes, as Joseph is pointing out, they would still want to maintain their tools for as long as they are usable. So they would want to find a way to maintain PKK both in Syria and Turkey. Because actually, if it's blown up in Syria, it will hurt it also in Turkey, because it's the same unit.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, Trump's going to want to pivot east, and I think he's made it clear that he wants to minimize U.S. presence in the Middle East specifically. And I don't see him wanting to bog the United States military down any more than he has to. So this is why I think, as you said, PKK's point here is just to maintain the status quo, because they know they're not going to get anything more. Mm-hmm. And I don't even think you're going to get to keep the status quo, to be perfectly honest.
Yes.
and that leaves the question of what are other actors in the region going to do? Specifically, we talked about this earlier, but what about Iran? What's their plan? Like, and I think they obviously have, Iran is realpolitik par excellence, in my opinion, when it comes to foreign policy. And, for them, yesterday's enemy is today's friend and vice versa. So, I think some of these entities that they probably were. In my personal opinion, I think that the only entity that you're never going to see Iran work with is ISIS. I think other than ISIS, perhaps Israel, everyone is negotiable. That's how I see it. Other than Iran, other than ISIS, which is obviously not going to happen, it's ISIS and Israel too for ideological reasons. But let's be honest, if a new leadership could even change that potentially. You know what I mean? I think this is Khamenei's whole mission more so than anything else to keep the status quo regarding their foreign policy. But anyways, it'll be interesting to see how they decide to interject into this Kurdish issue, into this PKK issue in the in Syria, because they've made it clear that they're going to do everything they can to interfere and meddle with whatever progress is being made domestically in Syria, whether it's arming Alawites, encouraging Alawites to rebel, encouraging Christians, just basically finding everybody who's not the regime and doing everything they can to stir up anger and resentment and rebellion. And, if you see them doing that with every other entity, there's no reason to assume that, they won't be on the phone with PKK anytime soon either, because that's probably already happened anyways.
They
So that's how it's
said that. Actually, some Iranian officials said that we should be supporting PKK in Syria. Now, that's interesting because the PKK affiliate in Iran is banned and has launched attacks against the government and the people in Iran. But that's again realpolitik, as you point out. One last point. There was today an attempt to attack Sayyidah Zainab shrine in Damascus that was foiled. The conspiracy theorists came saying this is Iran through Daesh, which shows that conspiracy theorists will say in rubbish, regardless of how can it stack. Iran through Daesh. I don't know how these people think or not think.
Yeah, I just look. I could easily see the Iranian government pulling off a false flag to get their point across, but not with this. You're right. Not with
the Syrian government. No, the Syrian government said this is Daesh.
Yes, and that's my point. Is I just don't think that
there is nothing.
Yeah.
Daesh is nasty enough to do all kinds of things that will be useful to all kinds of people. So if this would have happened, of course Iran would have made use of it, but that doesn't mean that Iran did it. These guys are
I
just
agree with that. I think that's exactly my point too.
These guys are just lunatics. So ascribing purpose or logic to lunatics is hard. Now, yes, you could argue that the presence of Daesh here and there has been facilitated and used by this or that particular act, and that makes sense. But saying that this particular act was instigated by this particular actor, it's hard to say. This is just going into guesswork, and that's not responsible.
It's interesting to realize, though, that at this point, now that Daesh has been around for over 10 years, they've almost created their own niche. They're useful for somebody at all times as the bad guy. You see what I'm saying? They've been around long enough that they're not going to just disappear, and they can be used by everybody for their own political purposes. So they've almost created their own business. They've created their own niche in the geopolitics where they're almost sort of they almost have power almost. They almost have it's really weird it's really interesting to see that they're so universally hated and loathed that they can be played off of by anybody who can take advantage of whatever atrocities they commit, which therefore makes them actually a relevant actor, even if they are weakened at this point.
In Syria right now, they are quite irrelevant, but the truth is you have lunatics who are proud to carry this flag, are willing to claim anything they have nothing to do with it that others have done and ascribe to them. And that makes them useful to any bad actor in the globe. That's another disease our Ummah has to deal with, but it's something that exists, just like the regimes.
Okay. Cool.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Cool. All right, guys. Thanks. Good
Thank you,
show.
Shoaib. Good job today.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum.
Nice. Salam.